Good morning. We are back for the Stacy Rodriguez trial. They actually got into the courtroom earlier today, and so I made sure that nobody was testifying. No one is, so I hurried and got us on. But it looks like Hosanna, the one who was with Stacy that night and possibly helped kill Chris, she takes the stand. I can see her sitting on it, so that would be really good. We're going to probably learn a lot. I'm going to go ahead and minimize myself so we can start watching just in case they have now started. Okay, so they hadn't started yet. Talking to her. Let's try her. I can't believe they have her just sitting on the stand for this long. All right, well, we haven't missed anything. She's been sitting there for almost 15 minutes. It's crazy. I'll look through really quick to see if there's anything that I should recap from yesterday. Well, we learned that from my own digging on the internet that she actually got married in Hosanna. She actually got married to her high school sweetheart, and they have 3 children together. And it looks like she just completely went off the rails and then started dating Stacy. Yeah, defense is going to be saying that Stacy was just trying to protect herself. Although with the prosecutors calling Hosanna, I think we're going to learn a lot. The Monica Cementelli trial starts early according to them. They moved it up to noon, but they're always late, so don't get too excited, but I'll be happy if they start at that time. It's been going on so late in the late afternoons, even like pushing early evenings, and I hate that. I do not like California's big time difference. I have a members only video coming out tonight. I wasn't going to make a video. I think I was just leaning to no. I was really thinking about doing something very specific. And then the last few days have been really crazy. And I'm not going to get into it now, but I'm definitely going to talk about it in the live. But with how crazy it's been, I'm like, I don't know if I even want to make this video. And I'm like, no, you can make it for the subscribers. I mean, I would assume they like me if they're following me. So I'm going to explain that all later to them. But it will be interesting. There's definitely some cat fights with certain channels. I don't think I've been doing this long enough to understand, like, if there's people that really don't like each other or if there's just animosity and things. But evidently there are things. And for anybody with the Monica trial, I think it's definitely going to be time for Chris to take the stand. I think he might be the first or second person called. Hopefully. Just want to get that part over with because there's going to be so much information. And I cannot wait for Baker to go. Last night we took my youngest to go try out instruments to her middle school next year. She's in 5th grade right now. And so they were all testing out the different instruments, deciding what they wanted to do. And she is going to do French horn, which is what my older daughter does. So that is fun. Although she has been in like so many musicals and choirs, and she does have a great voice, but I think she just wanted to try something new. So I've been saying that I predict closing arguments for this trial will either be today or tomorrow. And I think I'm pretty spot on. I think after her, they could possibly do arguments, and that's that. Unless they take a million breaks that are all 5 hours long, then it would get pushed back. A lot of this whole trial, like taking all these days, if they weren't so bad with times, they could have gone a lot faster. But no, now it's dragged on forever. I'm gonna go warm up my coffee. I'll be right back.
All right, the court is on the record on 21 CR 2296, People of the State of Colorado versus Stacy Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez appears today with counsels Ms. Devereaux and Ms. Trujillo. Mr. Praley and Mr. McCormick appear for the state. We come on today for day 7 of jury trial, and we are outside of the presence of the jury. Mr. Praley, you said you had an issue to address. Go ahead.
Judge, actually, it's my issue.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
sorry.
And then just for the record, Ms. Lilly is present, counsel for Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Judge. So I might have a scheduling issue. As the court's aware, both myself and Mr. Coleman represent Ms. Varela. Myself and Mr. Coleman were endorsed witnesses, and we've been sequestered until this moment. Mr. Coleman still is sequestered. I have a prelim scheduled at 3 in Division 11. My client waived, but I still have to attend and observe, and I need to be personally present for that. So I just want the court to be aware. I will certainly do my best to try to find coverage if we get to that point, but I'm not sure that that's something that I can find coverage for. So,
Okay. And you said it's 3 this afternoon?
yes.
All right. And am I understanding correctly? Is it your client's prelim, or are you watching another co-defendant's prelim?
It's the co-defendant. My client had originally set for prelim at the same time. She has waived, but I still need to be present and watch the co-defendant's portion.
Okay. We'll do everything that we can to get through this, and if it gets to 3 and we're still proceeding, then we'll address that issue.
Okay. Thank you, Judge.
All right. All right. Ms. Devereaux, do you have any other issues that we need to address before we bring the jury back in and resume?
Just for the record, I did email Mr. Perea and Mr. McCormick last night the exact timestamps, the exact jail phone call, and the exact discovery packet that the defense proposed exhibits. S is in Sam, T is in Tom, is U is in unicorn.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Praley, Mr. McCormick, anything the state needs to address before we bring the jury back in?
No.
All right, thank you. If you'll bring them in.
So the judge had responded to her saying that if it gets to B3, they'll figure out what to do from there. But that is a good indicator that they are probably going to try to do closing arguments and end it today.
Thank you. Please be seated. Ms. Varela, since we're beginning a new day, I'm going to swear you in again. If you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And I'm sorry, ma'am, can you answer by the way?
Yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Ms. Devereaux, you may resume.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
So I want to start this morning where we left off yesterday with all the technology issues. Have you had an opportunity to listen to that jail phone call with Javi that we were talking about yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay. And so again, just to kind of recap where we were yesterday, when you were first arrested, you thought you were going to be able to bond out of jail. Right?
Yes.
And so your plan was to tell your children that you were just on vacation.
Yes.
And again, you weren't planning, obviously, to be arrested on that November 11th date, right?
Yes.
So you were just abruptly taken from your children's life.
Yes.
And Javi was telling you that he didn't think it was going to work telling your children that you were on vacation.
Yes.
Specifically because what if you never got out?
Yeah.
And you told Javi not to tell your kids anything else because you didn't want them to know that you were in jail.
Yes.
And you didn't want your kids to worry, right?
Yes.
And Javi said, quote, "They're going to ask about you. What do you want me to do if you fuck yourself?"
Yes.
And your kids were asking where you were, right?
Yes.
And I have previously let you listen to what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit S as in Sam, and your initials and date are on it, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
U is in Unicorn,
Yes.
and again, your initials and date.
Yes.
And T is in Tom,
Yes.
and again, your initials and date,
Yes.
right? And can you tell the jury who's talking on these videos?
Me, my kids, and my hubby.
Okay. And these are phone calls or recorded conversations that you were having with your children while you were in the Weld County Jail,
Yes.
at the very beginning of your stay at the Weld County Jail, right?
Yes.
And they're a fair and accurate depiction of these conversations that you were having with your children, right?
Yes.
Here at this time, I would move to admit Defendant's Exhibit S as in Sam, U as in Unicorn, T as in Tom.
Any objection from the state?
No objection.
All right, the court will admit S, T, and U into evidence, and you may publish at your discretion.
Just for the record, that was S.
The mommy. Are you at home? Are you here now? Yeah, on vacation. Why? Because. Are you here? What? Are you doing okay? Yeah. Yeah. Mommy, are you here? No, mommy's feeling better. I love you, baby.
Just for the record, that was T, and next will be you.
Mommy, are you still at that? What, baby? Mommy, are you at the office? Yes, I'm not vacation. I guess you baby.
We can hear, is it fair to say, your voice quiver when your children ask you where you are?
Yes.
We can hear it in your voice, the pain it must have caused you in those moments to not be able to tell your children that you were coming home.
Yes.
And anyone who knows kids know, especially at that age, when they have something in their mind, they don't let it go, right?
Yes.
They keep asking the same questions.
Yes.
So you had to have these unbearable conversations with your children almost every time you talk to them.
Yes.
And it had to have been even harder to have to lie to your own children about where you were.
Yes.
And it had to have been unbearable to not know if you were ever going to see your children again outside of jail.
Yes.
And ma'am, you had to have been having the highest levels of emotions going on in those early days.
Yes.
Things like guilt, right?
Yes.
Shame,
Yes.
sorrow.
Yes.
And Javi wasn't necessarily making things easier on you, was he?
No.
Javi wasn't sugarcoating for you how you being in jail and making the choices you made were impacting your children.
Yeah.
For example, during one of these initial phone calls, one of the things he describes to you is how your son even brought it up just going to get a haircut.
Yeah.
And how your son just randomly told him, Mommy's never coming back.
Yeah.
And you had to hear that. He wasn't hiding it from you. You're trying to make your days go a little bit better or easier, right?
Yeah.
And another example is there were times where you were trying to reassure Javi that things were okay. They were going to be okay, right?
Yes.
And Javi would just kind of snap at you in frustration.
Yes.
On one occasion, and this was around the same time you first met your lawyers, Javi snapped at you when you just asked him if he was okay. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He said, quote, "What do you mean, am I okay? No, I'm not fucking okay. You think I want to be okay with all of this? The kids are literally getting mad at me because..."
Hearsay, Your Honor.
All right. Any response, Ms. Deborah?
Effect on the listener. It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
I'll overrule the objection. You can continue.
The kids are literally getting mad at me because you don't pick them up.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're in the Will County Jail and everything has been dumped on his plate.
Yes.
Your high school sweetheart is furious at you.
Yes.
Furious at putting him in this situation where he has to face his children every day
Yes.
because you weren't there. And after a while, you reassured Javi that you were going to tell the kids the truth, right?
Yes.
And you reassured Javi by saying, I'm not just going to leave them like that, right?
Yes.
And Javi again snapped at you, and he told you you did leave them like that, right?
Yeah.
He even actually raised his voice at you during that conversation.
Yeah.
And he said you left them in this situation, or you left them because you put yourself in this situation.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. He is not wrong.
And, ma'am, not only were you dealing with the gut-wrenching conversations with your children and Javi,
Yeah.
but you were also dealing with and grappling with how being incarcerated on these charges impacted the rest of your family.
Yes.
The people that you love the most, your sister,
Yes.
Hannah. Is that your sister's name?
Yeah.
Your sister, again, during these initial couple weeks, actually had to take time off work to go to your first court appearance, right?
Yes.
And you were really embarrassed because she had to tell her boss what was going on.
Yes.
And you were embarrassed that your sister's boss was going to think that you were a criminal.
Yeah.
Embarrassed about how that would reflect back on your sister as well.
Yeah.
And your arrest, you're very close with your sister Hannah, right?
Yes.
And sure, it's embarrassing to have to tell, a boss that you need to go to a court date, right? But she was pretty communicative with you about how it was really impacting her. For example, she told you about having a dream that you were released from jail,
Yes.
and that when you were released from jail, your father, who had passed away, was there to greet you.
Yeah.
So you being in custody on first-degree murder charges, you're hearing your sister's even dreaming about it.
Yeah.
And then there's also a conversation, another dynamic with Hannah of you two trying to figure out how do you tell the rest of the family and what do you tell the rest of the family, right?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about some more shame, right?
Yes.
Why not just tell the
And
truth?
That was also a concern from your mom, right?
Yeah.
And during one of these initial jail phone calls with your mom, you guys are trying to plan, like, what do we tell the rest of the family, right?
Yes.
You had to worry about, how do I tell my grandmother I'm in custody on first-degree murder charges?
Yeah.
And then you're also worried, obviously, about how people who may know you in the community see this, right?
Yes.
Because you went to high school here in Greeley.
Yes.
Your sister told you about there being Facebook posts, news articles, right?
Yes.
And this was something that you talked about with your sister about how embarrassing this is.
Yes.
Right. And you knew that your kids' teachers would see it.
Yes.
And you're sitting in jail on first-degree murder charges, and your family is just left in the community to deal with all the aftermath.
Yes.
And that's pressure on you, isn't it?
Yes.
So again, you're experiencing all of these wild emotions, right? Like emotions that you probably can never have fathomed in your life, right?
Yes.
And you're experiencing all this as you're going to your first court date. And at that first court date is when you figure out you're not getting a bond.
Yes.
There is no way of getting out of jail.
Yes.
And after you met with your lawyers for the first time, you told Javi that the male lawyer, Mr. Keith Coleman, right,
Yes.
told you that he would take him about 30 days to get police reports and review and everything.
Yes.
And Javi was, again, pretty angry at you, right?
Yeah.
He said, quote, "You're telling me you're going to be in there for 30 fucking days?" Right?
Yes.
And then those 30 days go. You had court on November 17th, 2021, right?
Yes.
Nothing happens at that court date, right?
No.
You don't get out of jail.
No.
And then the case gets continued to January 12th, 2022, right?
Yes.
Which meant another 2 months of you being in jail.
Yes.
Right. And you tried to call Javi after that November court date, and he didn't answer you, did he?
I really don't remember. It sounds about right.
Do you remember a time where he answered and you were like, why haven't you been picking up the phone? And he said, because if he had answered, he would have, quote, went fucking off on you. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And so leading up to that January 12th, 2022 court date, things aren't getting any better, right?
No.
You're still in jail, and then that January court date came after Christmas, right?
Yes.
And so you had just missed Christmas with your family.
Yes.
Instead of opening presents with your kids, you got colored Christmas tree drawings from them in jail.
Yes.
And so as you're approaching that March 23rd, 2022 court date, again, it's just piling on top of all of these emotions, right?
Yeah.
All of these pressures, all of these stressors, right?
Yes.
And on top of all of those sort of outside of jail pressures and stressors, there's a lot also going on inside of the jail too, right?
Yes.
And you kind of alluded to it a little bit yesterday with your testimony, but I think you described it really well in a letter that you wrote your sister on May 10th, 2022. You wrote your sister out of essentially exasperation saying, quote, "It's been hard because how I was telling you, I feel like a damn animal."
Yes.
Quote, "Like, this is inhumane. I literally cannot be around anyone, talk to anyone. When I come out of my cell, it's like walking into another cell."
Yes.
And you go on to tell your sister, quote, "I can't even see the daylight."
Yes.
And that was just 3 weeks approximately before your proffer with Investigator Burrows, right?
Yes.
And again, leading up to that proffer with Mr. Burrows and Mr. Perelia, again, you're missing significant milestones in your children's life.
Yes.
And at this point, you've been in custody for about 7 months, right?
Yes.
And the full magnitude of the situation has been very well made to you, right?
Yes. Yes.
You have lawyers, you have no bond, you know you are in it, right?
Yes.
And you know that what's at stake here is essentially your ability to watch your children grow.
Yes.
You know that what's at stake here is the ability for your children to have a mom who's not in prison.
Yes.
And 23 days before your proffer, you wrote a letter to your son about missing his kindergarten graduation on May 16th, 2022.
Yeah.
You also wrote a letter to Javier at the same time, right?
Yes.
And in that letter, you told Javier that you were, quote, bawling your eyes out, right?
Yeah.
And you described how your heart hurts because you were bawling your eyes out that your firstborn graduated from kindergarten and you didn't get to experience it.
Yes.
You wrote, quote, literally all these milestones and him graduating kindergarten being one of them.
and I'll never be able to have that memory with him.
Yes.
And your kids then had to send you Mother's Day cards in jail, right?
Yes.
And there was nothing you could do about it, right?
Yes.
Until there was, right? On June 8th, 2022, you went to the Greeley Police Department, right?
Yes.
And that came after you had a conversation with your sister where she talked to you about the importance of not discussing your case with anyone in the jail. Remember that?
Yes.
Your sister told you, don't say anything about your case to people in the jail because they would use it against you to get time off their own sentence.
Yes.
Meaning your sister is telling you months before that June 8th proffer, that this is how it works. You tell people information and you get time off of your sentence
Yep.
to make your own legal situation better, right?
Yes.
And you told your sister that you were also hearing that from the guards as well at the jail, right?
Yeah.
And so you go to the Greeley Police Department after your attorney had set up this proffer, right?
Yes.
You didn't call the district attorney personally, right?
No.
You had to go through your lawyers, right?
Yes.
And your lawyers were the ones who actually broached the subject with you, right?
Yes.
And that proffer at the Greeley Police Department was approximately 7.5 hours long.
Yes.
You were there for a long time, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows walked in and introduced himself, right?
Yes.
And then the district attorney who you signed the proffer contract with also came and introduced himself, right?
Yes.
Do you see him in this courtroom?
Yes.
Can you point to, or can you tell the jury where he is seated and describe a piece of clothing he's wearing?
He's seated at the end and he's wearing gray suit.
So that was the district attorney who came in and gave you this opportunity, right?
Yes.
And were you aware that Mr. Perelia and your attorney, Miss Lilly, used to be colleagues?
No.
Were you aware that Miss Lilly used to work for this very district attorney's office?
I knew she was used to be a DA.
Okay. And so she didn't, or you didn't know that they were actually coworkers together, right?
No, I don't ask questions like that.
Okay. And the entire first half of your proffer was essentially what I would classify, and please let me know if it's wrong, a narration. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So Mr. Burrows said, tell me everything, right? I'm not going to ask you any questions initially. Just you tell me what happened.
Yes.
Right? And you talked for quite some time, right?
Yes.
About 43 minutes of just continuous narration about what happened, right?
Yes.
And during that 43-minute narration, you had your chance to just get everything out on the table, right?
Yes.
No time limits,
No.
no interruptions, right?
No.
And again, your lawyers had prepped you for going, right?
Yes.
To this moment. They didn't just meet you at the Greeley Police Department without prepping you, right?
Not really necessarily prepping. It just showed me pictures of Christopher and
Right.
said to him,
And they explained to you what a proffer was going to look like, right?
yeah,
And they explained to you the importance of being very detailed about what happened,
yes,
and also about what particular points are going to be important for you to talk about.
no, I don't remember them saying that.
And during that 43-minute narration, you never mentioned asking Stacy when she realized that she wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson.
I believe I did say that.
In fact, you waited. Well, let me ask you this. It wasn't until just about after the 3-hour mark of your proffer that you told Mr. Burrows that you had asked Stacy about the moment she wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson, right?
Yeah,
And so the initial part of the interview, 43 minutes, the narration, you never once tell him, hey, I had actually asked Stacy, at what point did you decide you wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson?
In the first 43 minutes, I never mentioned it.
You never mentioned it.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that just came to you when Mr. Burrows was asking you questions about how many times Mr. Dickerson slapped your rear end, right?
Yes.
And you spontaneously said, now I remember. I asked her once, when did you realize that you were going to kill him?
Yeah.
Now that you remember, right?
Yes.
And it just so happened that you remembered that point after you had a 30-minute break approximately with your attorney, Miss Lilly, right?
Yes.
So Detective Burrows is asking you questions and going through sort of a second time after you mentioned, so let me take that back. When Detective Burrows is asking you questions and going through things a second time, you had essentially just forgot that your co-defendant for murder had told you that she randomly decided to kill a guy in the back seat of a car on the way back to the house.
Yeah.
And it was in fact so out of the blue that Detective Burrows asked you, so wait, we're talking about after? Like you asked him or asked Stacy after this all happened, right?
Yeah.
And you again reiterate, yeah, I just remembered, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, ma'am, you offered this information to Mr. Burrows because you knew it mattered, right?
It was the right thing to do.
Because it mattered, right?
Yeah.
You had been charged with first-degree murder, right?
Yes.
Your attorney certainly went over what first-degree murder means, right?
Yes.
The elements of the crime.
Yes.
And you had received a copy of the complaint listing out your charges from the court.
Yes.
And you, again, knew specifically Mr. Burrows and Mr. Perelia, the prosecutor, were going to be particularly interested about at what point Stacy decided or formed the intent to kill someone, right?
I would assume, yeah.
Yeah. And you also knew that you would be the only source of that information,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You knew that that was essentially a hole to their case that only you could fill, right?
Yes.
Which is why 3 hours into the interview and after a 30-minute conversation with your attorney, you just suddenly remembered this important fact, right?
Yeah.
And deciding to kill someone during a car ride to give someone else a ride is a fairly odd thing, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, most people ride in cars with other people, give them rides, they don't decide to randomly kill someone, right?
Yeah.
And you had told Mr. Burrows during your proffer that you actually even questioned in hindsight, like, why that moment?
Yeah.
Right? Because you were thinking that you were just going back to that house, or you guys were just going to go back to Mr. Dickerson's house and drink, right?
Yes.
And you told Mr. Burrows at one point during your proffer that you were okay with how things were going that night.
Yes. And
so it was sort of like this weird, illogical thing that Stacy was plotting to kill this guy in that very moment.
Exactly.
And you had told Mr. Burrows specifically that at that moment, there was, quote, good vibes.
Yes.
Right? And I think yesterday you told this jury even that it was fun, right?
Yes.
You also told this jury yesterday, under oath, that Mr. Dickerson slapped your butt 1 to 2 times, right?
Yes.
That it was just a, quote, minor event,
Yes.
right? And when you spoke to Mr. Burrows during your proffer, you knew it was important to describe what happened very accurately.
Yes.
Especially anything that could have been a source of potential conflict between Stacy and Mr. Dickerson.
Yes.
And you told Detective Burrows told you that he needed you to tell the truth, right?
Yes.
And the same truth that you took an oath yesterday to tell this jury, right?
Yes.
And again, you told this jury that Mr. Dickerson slapped your butt 1 to 2 times, right?
Yes.
Sorry, Judge, does this volume go up anymore?
I don't know how far up it is now, but the remote is over there somewhere.
Sonia, is there anything? Okay, let's try it again.
What's that?
I didn't know if you had like an overall courtroom volume.
Do we have anything like that?
Your Honor, can we approach?
Sure.
Thank you, Judge. All right, so again, you told this jury Mr. Dickerson slapped your butt 1 to 2 times, right?
Yes.
you able to hear that okay? Yep.
But I think it worked. Yeah, it worked after the second time.
This one? Let's try.
If we could stop playing an exhibit, Your Honor.
Yes, Ms. Devereaux, can you pause that till we get this figured out?
I'll unplug it.
Your Honor, can I just approach the witness instead?
Sure.
And Your Honor, for the record, can we describe what exhibit is being provided, what the timestamps are being provided, so that we can correspond with that, because I'm not able to listen at the same time she is.
Can you provide that to Mr. Braley?
Yes, absolutely. Just for the record, it's the proffer interview, hour 3 hours even and 16 seconds.
I didn't hear.
I know. Your Honor, I'm so sorry. So during the proffer, again, proffer that you agreed to tell the truth at, you told Mr. Dickerson, I'm sorry, Mr. Burrows, that Mr. Dickerson slapped you in the rear end 4 to 5 times.
Yes, I heard more than 4 times, yeah.
Okay, you said, quote, it was probably like 4 or 5,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
You described to Mr. Burrows during your proffer interview back on June 8th, 2022, that he touched your rear end every single time you stood up, right?
Yeah.
So much so that you described to Mr. Burrows, Mr. Dickerson, as, quote, very touchy, right?
Yeah.
And just to clarify, ma'am, Stacy never saw him do this, right?
She never told me she saw him. I assumed she did.
You assumed she did, right? That's what you're telling this jury today, right?
Yes.
But back on June 8th, 2022, when you met with Mr. Burrows, you told him that Stacy wasn't looking, right?
Yeah.
You told Mr. Burrows that Mr. Dickerson was only doing it when Stacy wasn't looking.
Yes.
And since Stacy didn't see Mr. Dickerson touch you appropriately, you claim that Mr. Dickerson was also turning the conversation to you that evening, right?
Yes.
Because she couldn't have been mad and jealous if she didn't see him do this, right?
Right.
So then she had to get mad at something, right?
Yeah.
And so she had to get mad because he was asking you questions about where you worked and not her.
Yes.
And you claim that Stacy was getting mad because he was showing more attention to you than her.
Yes.
Because again, if Stacy wasn't upset for something, it'd be really odd for her in the backseat of that car to be like, I'm going to kill this guy, right?
Yeah.
And in also making this claim, it really portrays Miss Rodriguez as sort of a jealous person, right?
Yeah.
Right? And about halfway through your proffer interview with Mr. Burrows, he took you back to the beginning of the night of October 2nd, right?
Yeah.
Including about you and Stacy being at Cubetta's.
Yes.
And whether you and Stacy were ordering drinks there,
Yeah.
right? And you told Mr. Burrows that you remember getting drinks.
Yes.
And you were asked by Mr. Burrows, like, how did you pay for them then, right?
Yeah.
And you told Mr. Burrows that Stacy would usually have men buy the two of you drinks.
Yes.
And when asked how she would go about doing that, you said that Stacy would flirt with guys to get them to buy you two drinks, right?
Yes.
She wasn't very good at it though, right?
No.
And so she would have you actually flirt with guys to get them to buy you drinks, right?
Yes.
None of those guys ended up dead, right?
No.
And again, you went to this proffer because you knew that prosecution's case had some pretty big holes, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality was there was only 3 people in that house that night, right?
Yes.
Mr. Dickerson wasn't around to tell what happened, right?
Yes.
It was either you or Miss Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
And at the beginning of the proffer interview, Mr. Burrows even admitted to you he had what he called, quote, holes, right?
Yes.
And that's where the information that you were providing was going to come in,
Yes.
right? And one such hole was essentially, was there any sort of hostility leading up to Mr. Dickerson's death, right?
Yeah.
You know, what happened? What triggered all this, right?
Yes.
And all you could tell Detective Burrows during your proffer was that, quote, it was kind of weird why Stacy was thinking at that moment she wanted to kill him, right?
Right.
Because again, there was these good vibes happening, right?
Right.
However, an hour and a half earlier in your proffer, you said something completely different. Remember that?
No.
Okay. Do you remember an hour and a half earlier telling Mr. Burrows that when Mr. Dickerson got the phone call from his friend who needed the ride, you were already feeling uncomfortable?
Yes.
And quote, in fact, your exact quote was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That you were feeling really uncomfortable and you just wanted to leave, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. You two are younger females at this strange older man's house, right?
Right.
And you got there and there was no after party happening, right?
Right.
You guys were under the impression he had a roommate, and there was no roommate there either.
Right.
It was kind of weird, kind of uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, or really uncomfortable in your own words, right?
Yes.
And so you actually didn't even want to go pick up the friend with Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
And after the trip to go give this woman a ride, things didn't really get any better in terms of your comfort levels, right?
I feel like I felt the same.
Okay. Actually, you described to Mr. Burrows this kind of uncomfortable and uneasiness around Mr. Dickerson escalating when you saw him in the bathroom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You were sitting on the couch in the living room, right?
Yes.
And that couch kind of had it was a small house, right?
Yeah.
And so you could see in the bathroom when the door was open nearby.
Yes.
And you described to Mr. Burrows Mr. Dickerson's actions in the bathroom as, quote, off.
Yeah.
You told Detective Burrows, quote, I was already uncomfortable and he's already been touching me. And the way I seen him in the bathroom was just off.
Yeah.
And it was something about how he was washing his hands caught your attention and made you feel, as you put it, weird, right?
Right.
During this proffer interview, you described to Mr. Burrows that something quote, something weird about him, right?
Right.
You told Mr. Burrows that Mr. Dickerson was, quote, very different, right?
Yeah.
And then as the proffer goes on, right, a couple hours in, your description of Mr. Burrows changes, right? I'm sorry, not Mr. Burrows, of Mr. Dickerson changes. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. And it changes when Mr. Burrows directly asked you about Mr. Dickerson's demeanor that night.
Yeah.
Mr. Burrows directly asked you, well, what kind of guy did he seem? Right?
Yeah.
And of course, your description of Mr. Dickerson at that moment changes because Mr. Burrows is directly asking you that question, right?
I was just remembering what I remembered about him.
Because you know the police didn't want to hear about Mr. Dickerson making you feel very uncomfortable or giving you the creeps, essentially, right?
I don't know.
You think that they want to hear about their victim being a creep towards you?
I didn't know what they wanted to hear. I was just telling my story and what I remembered.
Okay. And you changed from Mr. Dickerson being, quote, weird, making you really uncomfortable, to Mr. Dickerson being a, quote, good guy, right?
Yeah.
Your description of Mr. Dickerson that night changed from being, quote, very different and weird and something weird about him to Mr. Dickerson seeming like a, quote, genuine and caring person.
Yeah.
And your answers changed about Mr. Dickerson's demeanor that night to fit the narrative that you believed the police wanted to hear.
No.
No?
No.
Okay, well, let's keep going then about how the ways you sold your story to police to, again, fit what you believed they wanted to hear, okay? Rather than simply just giving the police a description of what happened, you certainly elaborated, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your elaboration, ma'am, painted Stacy as essentially pure evil, right?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And Mr. Aurelia left quite a bit of the details out when he spoke to you, but I want to get into these details, okay? You described Stacy having blood on her hands and in her nails, right?
Yeah.
And you elaborated that while Stacy had blood on her hands and her nails, she's just glowing, right?
Yeah.
You told this jury yesterday that she just looked refreshed and excited that she had just killed this person, right?
Yes.
With blood everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that was consistent with what you told Mr. Burrows, right?
Right.
That Stacy was excited that she had just killed someone,
Yeah.
right? Refreshed that she had just taken someone's life, right?
Right.
And if that's not bad enough, you kept going, didn't you? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even more horrifying, right? You, again, told Mr. Burrows that after Stacy killed Mr. Dickerson, she, quote, tasted his blood,
Yes.
right? So here she is, just randomly killing someone after deciding on the way home from a car ride that she's going to kill this guy for no reason. She's got blood all over her hands and nails, and now she's dramatically licking her hands and saying his blood tastes dirty, right?
I just seen her lick her hand, and I asked her about it later.
Yeah, and you told Mr. Burrows that she said his blood tasted dirty,
Yeah.
right? So now we're talking some like straight Hannibal Lecter stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you kept going, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if killing someone randomly and killing and drinking another human's blood wasn't evil enough, you also described it to Mr. Burrows after the fact, after the house is burnt down, you two essentially leaving, and you look over and you see Stacy has the blood on her hands, right?
Right.
And you dramatize Stacy looking at her hands and catching you looking at her as she's looking at her own hands, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you dramatically add that it was at that moment that Stacy was like, all right, I'm going to be honest with you, right?
Right.
Yeah. She's dramatically blood all over her hands. She catches you looking at her, and she said, this isn't the first time I've killed before, right? Something along those lines, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, you told Mr. Burrows pretty extraordinarily that this 19-year-old girl that you had been in a relationship was confessing to you to have taken other people's lives before,
Right.
right? And not even just once, right?
No.
No. You say that Stacy's like, let me be clean with you. I've killed maybe about 4 or 5 other people, right?
Yeah, she said 4 people.
Yeah. So now, not only is she a Hannibal Lecter drinking blood of another person that she just randomly killed, but now she's also a serial killer, right?
Right.
And that's what you're telling Mr. Burrows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here you are, you had just, again, completely observed, according to you, this unprovoked, gruesome, blood-drinking serial killer in action, right?
Right.
And you described to Mr. Burrows sort of your immediate reaction to learning this from Stacy, right?
Right.
You're in the car, everything had just gone down, right? You're hearing this now, right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows that you sort of acted in a way that you were cognizant of not wanting to startle Stacy, right?
Right.
You described Stacy essentially like waiting for your reaction to see if you believed her or not.
Yeah.
And that you were mindful not to be like, oh my gosh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Those are your words, right?
Yes.
Instead, you recounted telling Stacy in that moment that you, quote, kind of knew, right?
Yeah.
Or, quote, something real calm like that.
Yeah.
That's how you're describing it to Mr. Burrows during the proffer, right?
Yes.
And just very casually, right?
Right.
You described her response being like, oh, really? Right?
Right.
So just paint this for the picture for the jury. So your girlfriend who just killed someone is telling you that she has killed 4 other people, loves drinking blood, right? Apparently. And she's like telling you this, and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of knew, I kind of figured that. And you're like, and she's like, oh yeah, really?
Yeah.
You knew that the whole time about me and you were okay? You still love me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you told Mr. Burrows that you had this response of being calm, casual, and supportive so that you felt like Stacy could open up about it more, right?
Right.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you were telling your partner that you knew that she didn't like your cooking the whole time you were together, that kind of casual conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And despite your strategy, you never learned anything else, right?
No, I had my lawyers look into it, and it wasn't true.
Yeah. And you also never got any details from Stacy, right? You were never following up like, well, ma'am, who did you kill?
Yeah.
Who else did you kill?
She did tell me.
You never told that to Mr. Burrows, right?
I don't recall.
No. You never told him anything about any alleged prior mass killings, right?
Yeah.
Right. One moment, Judge.
Sure.
But internally, you described to Detective Burrows having a very different reaction, right?
Right.
You told Mr. Burrows that in your mind, you were screaming.
Yeah.
That your initial reaction to hearing that your partner was now on her 4th or 5th killing, including in front of you, was sort of this internal screaming and realization that you had let this person around your children,
Right.
right? And as a mother, your children have to be your number 1 priority, right? Like you are tasked with their safety and well-being, right?
Right.
And at that point, you hear this and you're having this sort of internal crisis, and understandably, you can't change things, right?
Right.
You can't go back and fix the fact that this person had been around your children, right?
Right.
What's done is done at that point, right?
Yeah.
But you certainly can going forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're now I'm going to ask to approach with what I've marked as defendant's exhibit V as in Victor, and I've shown Mr. Brillia.
And I'm sorry, you said V as in Victor?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Take a look at that. Let me know you've had a chance to review it. Ma'am, do you recognize what that is?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a picture that you took of Miss Stacy Rodriguez and your two children trick-or-treating in downtown Greeley?
Yes.
And you took that picture, and so you know it's fair and accurate depiction of the picture you took, right?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, I move to admit defendant's exhibit V as in Victor and request to publish.
Any objection to that exhibit?
No.
All right, the court will admit into evidence defense V, and you may publish at your discretion.
Bless you. So, ma'am, those are your two children, right?
Yes.
Okay. And your two kids we see here, your son's dressed as Batman, and I can't tell what your little daughter is from here, maybe a Disney character. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah.
And this is Miss Rodriguez and your children at downtown Greeley's trick-or-treat event, right?
Yes.
And if I gave you the date of October 29th, 2021, does that sound about right?
Right.
Right. And so knowing that this person you claim killed someone completely unjustified, you're letting your children stand there and pose at trick-or-treating, right?
Right.
Yeah. This person who you want this jury to believe just randomly decided to kill Mr. Dickerson on a car ride back in the middle of the night, you're letting your children go trick-or-treating with them.
Right.
This person who's drinking the blood, you're telling this jury under oath, you saw her pull some Hannibal Lecter stuff, drinking blood, saying it's dirty after she just unprovokedly murdered. And you're just letting her around your children.
Right.
Thank you. Have one moment, Judge.
Sure.
I was saying in the chat, but I'll say again. Yeah, they were playing phone conversations, just the audio.
It's probably fair. Mr. Prilly is going to get back up here and say something to you along the lines of, Stacy insists on going trick-or-treating with you that night, right?
Yeah.
And you were there, right?
Yes.
So you could kind of monitor, it's fair to say, what was happening with your children.
Right.
That's a fair thing, right? A fair point. And your kids were safe because this was out in public, right?
Right.
Right. You certainly weren't going to leave your kids alone with Stacy, though, right?
Right.
Not after seeing all that, right?
Right.
Right. Ma'am, I'm going to show you another exhibit, okay? And this one, Your Honor, is going to be Defendant's Exhibit W.
W, okay.
Then Walter, and I'm showing Mr. Perelia. May I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
Ma'am, take a look at that conversation between you and Ms. Rodriguez. Ma'am, that's a conversation or a screenshot that you took of a conversation between Miss Rodriguez and yourself, right?
Right.
And that was on November 7th, 2021.
Right.
That's one, right? Yeah. So a month after all this happens, right?
Right.
Right. And you know that's Miss Rodriguez because you obviously took the picture, right?
Yeah.
You were having this conversation, right?
Right.
So that's a fair and accurate depiction of a conversation that you were having with Miss Rodriguez on November 7th, 2021, right?
It doesn't show the date on my end.
Okay. Would it assist you to see a copy of the what we call metadata that has the date it was created?
The date I screenshotted it,
Yes.
but what about the date on the message?
The date that it was created. There's no message, right? You took this screenshot, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you were controlling the date on it, right?
Okay. The date I took the screenshot. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the screenshot that you took of this particular conversation between Ms. Rodriguez and yourself?
Yes.
At this time, I would move to admit Defendant's Exhibit W.
Any objection to W?
No.
All right, the court will admit into evidence defense W and may publish at your discretion.
Can you publish, please? And ma'am, what this says is Miss Rodriguez, it's her picture at the very top, right?
Yes.
You call her, at this point, she was labeled in your phone as baby, right?
Right.
Not baby Joker, right? Right. And you say, and Miss Rodriguez is asking you if it's okay if she showers while your daughter sleeps, right?
Right.
And you said yes, right?
Yeah.
And you ask her, can you check on Anaya?
On IE.
I'm sorry for that mispronunciation, right?
Yes.
And again, in this message, you're asking Miss Rodriguez to check on your daughter, right?
Right.
And as you pointed out to the jury, there's no date on this, right?
Right.
All we have is the date that you created the Snapchat, right?
Right.
Or the snapshot of this picture.
Right.
But there were certainly times where you did leave your children with Miss Rodriguez after all this happened, right?
I don't recall ever leaving them.
You don't recall
I
leaving
was
them
always with them after the fact,
after the fact.
but I have left them alone with her before.
Yeah. We can take that off. Thank you. And while at Mr. Dickerson's residence, your response to what you were seeing was also pretty extraordinary, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. When you met with Mr. Burrows, do you recall him showing you pictures of Mr. Dickerson's house from like a realtor app?
Yes.
And he was showing you these to see if they were similar to the layout that you recall from the night of October 3rd, right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows that they were in fact, right?
Yeah.
Nothing had changed in the house, right?
No.
And you sort of used these pictures to sort of orient him to where everyone was, right?
Right.
Would you recognize those pictures?
Yes.
And they were probably in your discovery too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This time I am showing Mr. Perlio what's been marked as proposed exhibits, defendant's exhibits, X as in X-ray, Y as in U, and Z as in zebra.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
May I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
So they were kind of giving her husband a hard time, saying that he
And are those fair and accurate depictions of the pictures you were presented of Mr. Dickerson's house by Mr. Burrows during that June 8th, 2022 proffer?
Yes.
At this time, move to and request to publish.
Any objection to X, Y, and Z?
No.
All right, the court will accept into evidence defense X, Y, and Z, and you may publish at your discretion.
Thank you, Judge.
I'll say what I was going to say on break. If I don't forget, hopefully it's coming soon. I think it is.
So, can I grab those pictures from you?
Can we change it to the actual exhibit? Like the letter instead of a narrative at the top that wasn't admitted?
Do you have, can you just show just the picture, Ms. Deborah?
Just click on the picture. Thanks, Jess. Okay, so sorry about that. So what we are looking here is Defendant's Exhibit Z, right?
Right.
And this is Mr. Dickerson's kitchen, right?
Right.
Wasn't probably decorated like that at the time, right?
No.
This is very clearly some sort of like staging, presumably, right?
Right.
Right. But the layout is all the same, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you're in this very kitchen the entire time Ms. Rodriguez is killing Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
Right. And if we can go to Y, please. So this is Defendant's Exhibit Y, and as you'd agree with me that this is the living room, right?
Right.
And again, it wasn't decorated like this back then, right?
Right.
But what you can see here is the living room and the kitchen were essentially just separated by this little doorless entryway, right?
Right.
And again, this is a really small house, right?
Yeah.
And you're in the kitchen by yourself when you hear everything going on in the living room, right?
Right.
And you know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And you know what's going on because as you described very vividly, you could hear the sounds of rubber and bone, right?
Yes.
And we can go back to Z, please. Yeah. The kitchen. Thanks. And yet, you just remain in this kitchen, right?
Right.
And you described for the jury that you sort of had your back towards these cabinets,
Right.
right? And you could hear what's going on, and there's a door right there, right? That green door?
Yes.
That's the green door that goes to the garage, right?
Right.
And while you're in this kitchen, Ms. Rodriguez is clearly preoccupied, right? You
Right.
have your phone on you, right?
Right.
You don't call 911.
Right.
You don't text your sister for help.
No.
You don't text your mom for help.
No.
You don't text Javi for help, right?
No.
You're just standing there in this kitchen, right?
Right.
And you explained to this jury earlier that the reason why you didn't take the garage door and leave and go get help or run for your own safety was because you didn't know how the garage door worked,
Right.
right? But ma'am, when you came into the house with Mr. Dickerson that evening, you guys came in through the garage,
Right.
right? So you saw him, you saw exactly where he would have opened and shut the garage door, right?
No, I don't remember how he opened it.
You were there, right?
I didn't know if he had a button or if it was a code.
Right. And so all you would have had to do is go out there and see if it was a code or a button, right?
Right.
And you would agree with me that we've all been inside garage doors or garages, right?
Right.
And the keypad is normally on the outside of a garage, not the inside,
Right.
right? So all you would have had to do was press a button and go get help, right?
Right.
And this was also a fairly populated neighborhood, right?
Right.
It was a residential neighborhood, right?
Right.
You're not out in the middle of the sticks somewhere,
Yes.
right? All you have had to do is either run out this door that we see, or if we can go to X, please. This is a different aerial view of the very small living room, right?
Right.
And there's the front door right there, right?
Yes.
And so even if you were in the kitchen and you're like, I don't know how to open the garage door, it's right there. The front door is right there, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 feet, right?
Yeah.
And Stacy's preoccupied, right?
Yeah.
And all you have had to do, ma'am, is go out that front door and go to any of those houses that we see,
Yeah.
right? I have one moment, Judge.
Sure.
Okay, so they were complaining about her husband not being supportive, was kind of making it seem like he's mean because he was so mad at her about this entire thing. But he also found out that she had been cheating on him.
You also told this jury under oath that when, instead of running for help, you wait in the kitchen until Stacy tells you to come back into the living room, right?
Yes.
And again, we have the blood drinking episode, and then you go back in the kitchen, and then you come back out a second time, right?
Yes.
And by this time, Mr. Dickerson's dying, right? He's dead or close to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you told this jury under oath that you saw Miss Rodriguez rummaging through his pockets, right?
Yeah.
And you told this jury under oath that she took his wallet, right?
Yes.
This wallet? That was never taken? Is it actually in evidence at the Greeley Police Department? You saw her, this is the one she took, right?
Yeah.
This is it? You also told, while I have this out, this jury that you saw Miss Rodriguez steal a Walmart gift card, right?
Yes.
And that she bought all these bleach and stuff to destroy what she had taken, right? That was your story, right? So she takes the Walmart gift card because she stole this wallet, right? But she leaves all these other gift cards, right?
I guess.
She leaves this one that's $100 master gift card, right?
I guess so.
She leaves, see if I can shake it a little bit for you.
But this being defense, it's almost like they want to push all the blame onto Hosanna.
She leaves another Walmart gift card, right? She leaves multiple gift cards to Sprouts, right? She leaves a bunch of gift cards, right?
Yeah.
She just randomly picks out one Walmart gift card, right?
Yeah.
You also claimed that after she's stealing his wallet, right, that you go with with Stacy to Mr. Dickerson's room, right?
Right.
But it's kind of weird because at one point you tell this jury you're just stuck standing there watching Mr. Dickerson die, but then you also tell them you're going to her room and are helping her essentially rummage through her stuff, right?
Right.
And you described going around his bed, right?
Yes.
And you find a gun, or what you think is a gun, on his nightstand, right?
Right.
And let's put this into perspective for the jury, okay? You just, again, ma'am, witnessed this horrific, according to you, unjustified, completely unprovoked killing, right?
Yeah.
You witnessed your girlfriend coming in, glowing with a broken weapon, excited, right?
Right.
You witnessed her drinking his blood and saying it tastes dirty, right?
Yeah.
And what do you do? What do you do when you see a gun? You say, "Hey, Stacy, I found a gun," right?
Yeah, I showed her it.
You showed her a gun. This wild, crazed, unprovoked murderer, you're showing her a deadly weapon, right?
Right.
You told Detective Burrows that Stacy noticed that you weren't very helpful in looking through Mr. Dickerson's belongings, right?
Right.
You told Mr. Dickerson that it was all Stacy who gave you the backpack, right?
I told who?
Mr. Burrows, that Stacy gave you the backpack just happened to be full of stuff, right?
Right.
And that's what you told this jury yesterday as well, right?
Right.
And that Stacy told you to just go out in the car and wait.
Right.
Because you had no idea what was in the bag, right?
No.
Right? You're just standing there helpless, not involved in anything. You aren't doing anything wrong, right?
Right.
And that sure makes it helpful for the judge to hear all this when you come back for that 35B, right? And ask for a reduction in your sentence, right?
Just telling the truth.
Yeah, your truth, which is making you
Combative.
seem like the absolute most evil villain in the world, right? And yourself.
How
a
is the
victim.
state not jumping in? They're not allowed to do that.
Yes, can you give the witness an opportunity to answer your questions, Ms. Deborah?
I'm just here to tell the truth.
Yeah. And so you told everyone, Mr. Burrows, this jury, that you exit Mr. Dickerson's residence and you go to the car, right?
Yes.
And we see it on video, right? As you're aware, you've seen Discovery, right?
Yes.
And so at this point, ma'am, you are completely physically removed from Miss Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
She's inside the house and you're in a car, right?
Right.
A car that you know that works because you just drove there, right?
Yes.
And Stacy gave you the keys, right?
Right.
And you don't drive off to escape.
No.
You just saw her licking someone's blood that she just killed, and you don't drive to the Greeley Police Department and say, "Help us"?
I did not.
You don't go to Javi's house and say, "Oh my God, my high school sweetheart, help me, keep me safe." Look, right?
I didn't.
You don't go to your mom, you don't go to your sister, you just sit there, right? And you also have your phone, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows actually asked you about that when you during your proffer, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember him asking you, like, did you have your phone in the car while you were waiting?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows kind of checked in. I was like, "Is your phone working okay?" You know, that kind of, and you're like, "Yeah," right?
Right.
And Mr. Burrows even asked you, "Why didn't you call the authorities? Why didn't you call for help?" Right?
Yeah.
And your answer, ma'am, was, quote, "I don't know if it ever crossed my mind."
Right.
It just didn't cross your mind to call 911 after you just witnessed someone be unjustifiably killed?
No, not in that moment.
You just heard and described for the jury, hearing this man taking his last gargling breaths, right?
Yes.
And you cried out front of them, right?
Yes.
And yet you don't call 911?
I did not.
Just doesn't cross your mind.
It did not.
And when Mr. Burrows is asking you about this, you realize that this doesn't sound very logical, right? It's not very logical that you wouldn't call the police in that moment, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? Just like Mr. Perelia was asking you questions about, not calling the police if this was a justified killing, right?
Right.
Right. And Mr. Burrows tells you and kind of gives you a heads up that this is going to be what's called a quote hard question, right?
Right.
He kind of gives you this heads up that eventually you're going to be here in this very moment having to answer this hard question about why you, if this went down the way you said it did, why wouldn't you call them for help?
Yeah.
Right? And there's obviously one easy answer, right? You were scared, right?
Yes.
Sure, Mr. Pirelli will come up and ask you some questions about that, right?
Yeah.
And an hour and 15 minutes after Mr. Burrows directly told you that you were going to have to come up with an answer for these, quote, hard questions, you did, right? A different one. Mr. Burrows asked, so were you with her after this happened? Were you seeing your kids regularly? Are you with Stacy every day? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Your Honor, can we approach, please?
Sure.
Yeah, so all of that was going on, and he was upset anyway. But then, because of all this, he found out that she had been cheating on him the whole time. So, yeah, I think all of that was dropped on like the same day. She was in jail already, and he got very angry. I am sure he divorced her, and he probably is not talking to her anymore because she made so many bad decisions. And then on top of that, she was cheating on him. Awful. All right, my part 1 of this, I think I'm gonna have to stop here and do part 2, finish it later. As I said, we have the Monica trial. They are coming on earlier than what they originally have been doing, and there's always a chance that they're gonna start late, but I want to go over there beyond so we don't miss anything, just in case they happen to actually follow the rules. So if you want to keep watching this, I would just go Law & Crime, probably have it up right now, although they are going to be going on a break very soon. And if you want to watch the rest later, I'll probably do that at like 8:30 my time. That's 8.5 hours from here. All right, thank you for watching. Hope you guys were enjoying this one. It's pretty cool being able to see somebody flip and testify against, and that is exactly what I want to happen in the Monica's trial. So I am ready to go over there and start hoping. All right, thanks for watching.